Welcome back to Media 7, where we're investigating TV news with the assistance of Paul Patrick, Richard Langston, Paul Norris and Trish Carter. Now, the modern stylings of the news are not, of course, purely a local phenomenon. This week's News Mash looks at how they do news in other places. The British parliamentary expenses scandal has provided occasion for rage and recrimination in the media. And, for the TV news, a chance to break out the fancy graphics. BBC Newsnight opened with green goo, followed by a montage suggesting that the shit had truly hit the fan. And later in the week, Channel 4 visualised the ripples emanating from Westminster. And then staged a virtuoso live cross.
Walk away from Parliament with
The dude walked through a door. That's why we all got into journalism. And then a slideshow on the Thames. But when they got down to it, it was the stand-up big screener-palooza that's this year's flavour for news presentation. Yet clearly, the BBC's news is more important because its screen is way bigger. It's so big, it goes around the corner. Size clearly matters. Look at the mission control set employed by Russia's Channel 1. But the newsreader, he's still sitting down. Don't they know? Meanwhile, to visit the news of less fortunate nations is to travel back in 3D time. Kosovo's spinning globe is so 90s. And on to North Korea's NCTV. They have a blue screen that's just, well, blue. But no survey of international news presentation can be complete without a lingering look at France's Melissa Thurio, the world's official most gorgeous newsreader.
Zone interdite. Ensuite, nous nous retrouverons dès début juillet pour les inédits de l'été.
Whose face has launched 1,000 YouTube tributes. She does actually have a master's in journalism, and although this 2006 news review might look like a Joss Whedon fantasy sequence, they're actually discussing judicial reform, war in Lebanon and rogue nuclear states. But what about a news without glamour? A news presented by the people we push to the margins. That's the premise of the new MTV program, How's Your News, which is fronted by reporters with disabilities.
America to bring you the stories like no one else can.
How would you like to be interviewed?
That's got to be the worst journalistic question I've ever heard.
I heard your performance, it was really good.
Thank you.
Were you sweaty?
It's produced by the creators of South Park and follows 2 feature films from the same team. When everyone's trying to look different, here's a news show that really is.
Ah, you made me look. You always do that.
Trish, there isn't a lot of diversity in the people on the news, is there?
Actually, I think they look quite diverse, Russell, to be honest with you. I think everybody does it differently, don't they? And if you go from international channel to international channel, you know, the Europeans have gorgeous women and fabulous sets. The Russians, you know, the Italians, gorgeous, gorgeous stuff. If you go to Al Jazeera, for example, they decided they didn't want to tether their correspondents to live shots. And so their emphasis is much more on news gathering and less on the technology. Now that's great, I might say, when oil is at $200 a barrel. When oil is at $50 a barrel, because they're funded by oil and gas, of course that becomes very expensive because you have to double team in the field. You still have to link a live spot while your correspondent's out news gathering, so it's not that straightforward.
I haven't even thought of that issue, actually.
Yeah, it becomes very expensive. So I think everybody does do it a little bit differently, and everybody, let me tell you, uses overseas consultants. Al Jazeera spent a fortune on having nothing else but a life coach come in and work with presenters and key correspondents for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours to coach the performance that the station wanted out of them.
Richard, TV3 News had the same outfit, Maggot and Associates, and recently. How was that? Were you trained?
No, I wasn't trained in particular. Actually, the thing I found most useful in television journalism was to watch some tapes from a training organisation in the United States, NTSC or somebody, and they made fantastic pieces of television. And that's why I still work in television, not to do live crosses, I don't get to do many of those anyway, but to make and craft television. But the point is, I think, to pick up on a point about presentation and this whole emphasis, well, it is a visual medium. And if you don't have command of visual language, you are going to founder on television, because I know some tremendous journalists who've worked in print and they've then tried to work in television. And because they lack the ability to speak and fluently and to present a piece of television, suddenly their credibility's shot. And I've seen tremendous journalists just go to pieces because they didn't have the ability to grapple with what was required on television. And that's a level of performance you underestimate until you have to do it.
And also, I think the ability to tell stories in pictures. I look at some of what Simon does on this show, and I just don't think that way. So that's obviously key to the job.
It's a huge shift. I don't care what you've got to tell me, Russell. Show me what you've got. And that's the basic emphasis of television. I mean, I love telling stories on television purely from a visual point of view. I mean, the information for me now, at my stage after 30-odd years of journalism and working in television, my emphasis is purely on the visual and on character. So that's what keeps me going, you know. I think it's a wonderful thing.
I think it depends too how people are now using the medium. I don't know about you, but at 6 o'clock the television might be on, but I'm in the kitchen chopping, drinking, preparing, organising, whatever. And if there is something on the television that I want to see pictures for, I will look. Otherwise, I don't sit there and look at it. So a lot of this technology and stuff passes me by. But I think as more and more people get on the net, they will go to television for pictures, and I think they'll go to television for analysis. Tell me what to think about this. And then I think you will see much more live shot, where there is much more interaction, much more movement than what we have now in terms of static
Surely
lives.
not tell me what to think, though.
Well, I think you were talking about the internet.
What to think about an issue, you know.
Right, well,
the
tell me
government's-
as much as you can about the issue and then you decide what to think.
That's
Anyway.
fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, give me the information so I can
Yes,
decide.
yes.
Paul Patrick, were you drooling a little bit there when you saw all those fancy digital effects? Is that the next step for the news here?
I drooled when I watched CNN's election coverage last year with the electoral map, which you could press a button, up came a polling booth from Illinois, and then they could break out who was voting for who in which county. It was just terrific stuff. That sort of thing, which is really adding value to the viewing experience. You can, anyone who's had to do a television story about numbers will always struggle with how much graphics you put into it. When you can break it down and use technology like that, I think it is a terrific visual aid. That sort of stuff really, I have to say, spins on
We
wheels.
don't have that in New Zealand, though.
No, we don't. That kind of stuff is tremendously expensive.
But the truth of it is, Russell, isn't it? It's always a challenge for all of us involved in the medium to try and work out how do we best use this technology? How do we use it positively and avoid the excesses? It's not a case of technological determinism where we have to use it. Nobody around here has to use it. We must make decisions about how and when we best use it. And I think that live crosses certainly have their place. They can really add value, but if they don't add value, then don't do them. And similarly, video walls can be very effective in communicating quite complex information. And that's what the bulletins on our channels should be doing. They should be providing the news of the day in context with analysis where appropriate. Because if they don't do these things, then people will desert them and go to the web. But the web can't do everything that television news does. And so television news has a strength. It needs to play to it.
It's pretty rare also, I think, when our major newscasts are on, that there is breaking news. Unless there is a contrivance in terms of a live shot, a demonstration or whatever. In actual fact, it's not all that often you get breaking news, I think, between 6 and 7. And I think the public are onto it. I think that the public can easily determine if they think a live shot is worthwhile or not, to be honest. Because live meant something new, a new development, something special, whereas live now is routine.
Yeah, I have to agree. It doesn't have to be a particularly big story to have one of the newsreaders out there doing a live cross, which always seems quite odd to me. They're not reporters, they're just reading the news from out there in the rain.
Yeah.
That's probably a bit of a simplistic view on it,
Possibly
I think. because I think that you can't just, you don't want to throw your presenter out in the field every other day, because that takes away the, I guess, the impact of having them out in the field. If you're going to put them out in the field, you've got to make sure it's for a story that's worthwhile. And we try to make sure that we pick those right stories.
And when we talk about presenters, we're on the main news bulletins, we're talking about two presenters. Paul, you put Richard and Judy together, so you're some sort of expert, I assume, on that basis.
Well, I think there are advantages in tandem presentation, and three, of course, having stuck with a single presenter for many years, decided to move in that direction as well. I mean, you can vary the pace, and you've got two people to appeal possibly to different segments of the audience and so forth. And for an hour-long bulletin or program, I think it's appropriate that you have two. I think two works better than one. There were two, I have to say, I didn't invent the tandem presentation. There were two there when I arrived.
But you picked the dream team,
Judy
though,
and
didn't you?
another, yes, and that didn't work too well, so we changed it and put Judy and Richard together, and that did endure quite successfully for 15 years or thereabouts.
Is there an emotional response you're seeking when you have the two presenters and you have them having banter with the sports presenter or the weatherman? What's going on there? What feeling are you trying to provoke in the audience?
Well, these people are all in the living rooms of the population around the country. They need to be seen as warm human beings who actually relate to one another. They shouldn't just be sitting there in splendid isolation. So that's why there is a degree of, I would say, conversation rather than banter.
The notion is it's your parents telling you what happened that day.
Right, your parents telling you, right. Wendy Petrie's a wee bit younger than me, I think, actually.
Yes. Well,
that would
young
be wrong.
demo.
Richard, you've been out there and you've filed any number of stories as a TV reporter. They seem to me to have a grammar that verges on being a formula. As Simon pointed out, oh, look, there's a medical story, we'll have pills pouring out. I've had people come around and interview me and ask me to type. In fact, every single time they ask me to type, which I find quite embarrassing because I'm not a very good typist.
Yes.
Is there a danger of these stories almost being phoned in when they have such a similar structure?
That is the real challenge to me often. See, but you can't invent too much in a television news report because then you're moving into something else. I mean, ideally a television news report is, I'm going to show you what happened. But sometimes you cannot. How are you going to show that there was a shift in the tax scheme? How are you going to show that on television? You can't go down to the IRD and film a shift because there won't be one. So then you resort to things like flicking money. And it's hard to avoid visual cliche. And actually, you pretty much are stuck with it. You can shoot the Reserve Bank, you can shoot Inland Revenue, but to come up with a new visual idea in that sense, and you can't have a wacky way out idea because then you change the whole tone of your story. You can, working for Campbell Live, you can do anything visually just about, you know. It's different, it's not the news.
Yeah, and I have to say for all our tut-tutting, we have a lot of fun making stories as well.
Yes, that's right. But you have, for news, it's different. You have to be pretty straight. So when you seek cliches, you pretty much have to stick with them or you're shifting. You're moving into a different area other than news. But you have to be very clear that this is a news story. This is not, it's easy to move into satire, Russell.
And I think it's going to be that some stories, depending on the time of day when they arrive, you're going to get more visual cliches in a story that is unfolding from mid-afternoon onwards than you would in a story that maybe is unfolding at 9 o'clock that morning.
More live shots.
Yes, and you're going to get bodies loaded into ambulances. That's the sort of thing you're going to get on a late-breaking story, if it's a disaster or... But, you have to give television credit. When it's at the scene of a disaster, there is no other medium.
No, it isn't. It's most powerful and potent, isn't it?
Twin Towers, these things will remain with us forever. Whoever saw those images on television will not forget them.
Trish, do you think now, I think this is what you were saying before, that people do look to the TV for the pictures and then go online to look for the context?
Sometimes.
So is there a division of responsibilities?
I think there is, but I do think it will swing back because, as Paul says, the net can't provide anything, and I think that's the next stage that television will develop into, much more analysis, to give me the information to determine whether or not I agree or disagree.
And yet we don't seem to be very well set for that at the moment because, say, compared to Radio New Zealand National, which I think has had a lot of success with identifying round correspondents and interviewing them on the radio and actually, they have credibility. I don't see as much of that on television. There seem to be a lot of young generalists. Is that a problem?
And indeed, some correspondents for TVNZ, their jobs were threatened in this latest round of cuts. There was a tendency, I think, to suggest that these older reporters who possibly cost a little more might be expendable, and that I think is a mistake because these people, as you say, they have areas of expertise and the organisation should be using those people to deliver meaningful, in-depth reports about their areas of expertise. I think it's a mistake to imagine that in order to make the bulletin compelling, you have to go down market and you have to appeal to the 18 to 39 audience.
Because they're probably not watching anyway.
Well, some will be watching, but the bulk of the audience will be 40 plus. And those people actually deserve to be recognised. Their needs deserve to be recognised. And what hasn't really been tried is, instead of going down market, go up market and see how that works.
Well, on that note, actually that's a very high-minded note, and I think we will finish on that one. So thank you to our panellists, Paul Patrick, Richard Langston, Paul Norris and Trish Carter. But there's one more thing. Sarah Daniels' Take Two is about, well, perhaps you best watch it.
Television news and current affairs, doing anything to bring you the stories.
Up next, the skydiving granny is coming back to Earth.
Like throwing your mother off the Sky Tower.
Yes, my mum is famous.
Television news and current affairs, bringing you the big issues.
The issues that matter. Up next, the miracle weight loss scheme that packs a punch.
Bringing you the presenters.
You are the best presenter in this country. Top of the heap.
Oh, 4 Logies.
Exactly.
And bringing you the questions you've heard, if not 100, then 1,000 times before.
Must ask the question on everybody's lips.
Does God exist?
Now, your breasts,
Yes.
are they real?
It's a serious business.
Police hunting the individuals who've threatened to kill Mrs. Thatcher say that their investigations are making good progress and that 47 million people are helping them with their inquiries.
And a glamorous business.
You haven't met me. I'm Ted Baxter, the anchor man.
So that's it from us.
It's good night from me, and it's good night from him.
And them.